Hi, everyone, and welcome to Industry Night with me, Nycci Nellis, the show that takes you on a deep dive into the happenings of the hospitality industry. Now, sometimes there's a focus on culture, and sometimes there's a focus on travel trends. Sometimes there's a focus on personal projects, but it all comes back to the industry. And here we are back at the beautiful private wine club, the WineLair in downtown DC, adjacent to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. I'm so excited to now be doing Industry Night here for the second week and for the long term, hopefully. Now, for those of you who are new to me, welcome, and a little bit of background on me. I've been covering the food, wine, and hospitality scene for the last 20 years through a variety of outlets: print, online, TV, radio, podcast, and social. If you live in DC, you're familiar with thelistareyouwantit.com, the online e-zine that tells you everything that's happening in the DC restaurant industry, including restaurant openings and events and all the yummy things you want to be doing. Of course, you tune in every Sunday to 1500 for Foodie and the Beast. That is the radio show that I've been doing for the last 14 years with my husband, David, the only food and wine variety show in the DC market. And of course, you follow me at NYCCI, NELLIS on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Well, at least Twitter for now, for all the other happenings and fun things I'm doing around town. So, how much fun has this past week been? It has been insanely delicious and so fun. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour on some of it, because if I told you about all of it, I would never get to my guests. So Salt and Sundry celebrated 10 years at Union Market. Amanda McClemens, a good friend, and her Cali boho style. We all toasted her and all of her fabulous glassware and fashion wear and amazing things that she carries at her store. So congratulations to her. While at Union Market, we went to Yasmin. So this just opened up. You know these guys, Gerald Addison, Chris Morgan, and their close friend, Saeed Haddad. So Chris and Gerald and Saeed were all together at Maidan. They got their Michelin star there, and now they've opened up this Lebanese-inspired Yasmin. They're calling it a kebab shop. I put that shop in quotes because it's not a kebab shop. It's like amazing food. They have a Lebanese wine list. I thought everything they were doing there was spot on. There's a reason why they won their star, and I can't wait to see what else happens for them. Now, this weekend, the Four Seasons and Michael Mina launched DC's first Georgetown Wine and Dine. It was an entire weekend with chefs from all over the country. Michael Mina was obviously here, so was my boy Adam Sobel, Robert Curtis, Kyle Connaughton, Michael Raffiti. The Vitaggio boys caused no trouble, but they were certainly here. Amazing wines from winemakers like Hill and Chateau du Tour and Screaming Eagle. I mean, it was pretty decadent. So now, I only went to certain components of the event. I went to this super, super posh reception on Friday night, seafood towers for days, Moet, Macallan, you name it. And then during the day on Saturday, there was truffle hunting trips and symposiums with wine and chats with the chefs. I didn't participate in any of that, but I was there for the dinner. So it was an 11-course meal. Each chef made a different course. All the wines that I talked about were poured. It was a who's event of who was there, and I'm not going to name who because it's against Four Seasons etiquette to tell you. They don't like to tell, but it was pretty snazzy. And if you are interested, and if you missed it this year, mark your calendar because it's coming back. It's going to be an annual event, and it's only going to get bigger and better. Now, I did hear a lot of chatter about Chef Kelly Suarez. She's now at Gerrard Street Kitchen. She's new to the DC region. And there's a real reason that we're hearing about her. So she is born Colombian, but has a real passion for Japanese cuisine and has actually spent many of her formative cooking years in Japan. And she is executing such a terrific menu at Gerrard Street Kitchen. And it really combines her love of Japanese cuisine with her Colombian roots. So if you have an opportunity to check that out, I highly advise it. Now, I'm going to be doing some travel soon, so we'll be talking about where I'm dining there soon. But I can go on for hours. Let's go on with the show to do. So, Emmanuel Laroche grew up savoring the best food and drink that France offers because he was born there. But he eventually came to America and got the nickname Champagne Charlie. and I feel like we should be best friends because I'm always drinking champagne when I'm not drinking my green tea. He has more than 20 years of experience in the food and beverage industry, both in Europe and in the US. Now, he has access to a variety of acclaimed people in the food industry. He has his personal podcast, Flavors Unknown, and recently he released his book, Conversations Behind the Kitchen Door. Now, this is a collection of conversations that he's had with award-winning chefs from various backgrounds and cultures, and they really share their personal experiences, and they also talk about sort of where food culture is today and why. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him. But first, since I am at the gorgeous WineLair, I'm very excited because they have an amazing chef here who I'm going to move into the screen. Here we go. So, Chef Kene Izegbu.
Yes.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you. So, Chef has an amazing resume, and I'm going to let her brag about it. So, Chef, tell us about how you got into the food industry.
Well, I'm actually one of 7, so I grew up cooking for my family, and then realized, hey, I want to do this for a career. So I'm born and raised in Virginia, and I dove into DC area, and the food scene was just amazing. One of my first gigs was actually working at Bourbon Steak for Michael Mina.
Okay. Wait, which chef were you working under?
Critchley?
Yep, John Critchley.
Yes.
I remember John.
Exactly.
He did not leave well, but go ahead. I know the story.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then I dove deeper and got to work for Eric Ziebold at Kinship Métier. I helped him open the place. I worked there for 2+ years, and then got a chance to work at the French Laundry, and I did that for
I mean, brag. Yes. But now you're here at WineLair. What brought you here to work with Chef John Crin?
So I came back at the end of last year, and I started private chefing. And then my brother actually knows John because they used to work at Enox together about almost 10+ years ago.
Pretty much.
And he told me, hey, there's an opportunity for a chef to kind of just have their own playground. Come cook here, come do it. And I said, why not? Let's build a kitchen.
So what does that look like for you? Because you are cooking food for people who are members of this wine club.
Yeah. Actually, to be honest with you, I think it's one of the most exciting opportunities because it's my menu that I build, and they can come and just explore it. And it is truly my playground that I'm building from the ground up. So, yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Now, it is National Diabetes Month.
It is.
And you actually have
Type 1 diabetes.
Type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
There are a lot in the food community who have diabetes. What is it like for you? What is it that you'd like to share about your experience with diabetes while still being an incredible chef and being surrounded by food and wine and all this, all the things that maybe diabetics shouldn't be surrounding themselves with?
Right. Typically, when people talk about diabetes, they always think type 2, but type 1 is kind of, I was basically born with it essentially. And I was always told, stay away from chocolate, stay away from sweets. But as time progresses, we see that you can just eat whatever you want, especially me being a very inquisitive person. I want to try everything I can. So to be able to try different types of food, try different types of cuisine is necessary for my job. But I think that's why I got into the industry, so that I know how to take care of myself, so that I know what to cook for myself or how to cook for myself properly. I've had it for 26 years, and it's been an uphill battle, especially in different kitchens, because I have to acclimate to it. But
well, how do you do that? I mean, if you don't mind going a little granular and being a little specific, what does that look like for you?
It's tough because when you see chefs and cooks, you're on the line and there's no break to get away or get something. But
right, because the kitchen is on fire,
it
right?
Is,
like dinner service,
it's always on fire.
There's no room for you to go into diabetic shock. So what do you do?
I'm lucky, especially we're taking it back to Kinship, which for me always feels like home because I love that place. It really taught me how to cook again. When I told them, hey, I'm diabetic and I need stuff, they're like, do whatever you have to do. Keep Skittles on your station, like keep juice on your station, and that's how I survived, and that's how I taught myself how to survive. Every day in the kitchen. And
I think we should say that's Eric Ziebold.
Yeah.
He and his wife, Celia, they're amazing people. It's also a Michelin star restaurant.
Absolutely.
With good reason, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And did you work upstairs at Kinship or downstairs at Métier?
So it's one kitchen for 2 restaurants.
Okay. Oh my God, so they were executing both?
Yes.
I never realized that.
It's even harder to be honest with
So,
you.
do you have any recommendations for people who maybe don't have type 1 diabetes, maybe type 2? Like, where are your resources? You know, especially since we're talking about it now, it is the month.
Right, exactly.
Any recommendations that you
That's a
have?
great
I know you're not
question.
an expert, but since
No.
you are
Yeah,
afflicted,
yeah.
what do you know?
One thing I do know, which is kind of disappointing, in the DMV area, there are not a lot of type 1 diabetic groups. It's mostly found on the California side, on the West Coast. But for me, when I first was diagnosed, it was just there wasn't a lot of knowledge. Now I have devices that help protect me, and I know when my blood sugar is every 5 minutes. So if you can, make sure you reach out to your endocrinologist and ask them what the new technology is to survive.
Because there is a lot of technology.
There's so much. There's so much out there.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Chef.
you.
Thanks for joining
Thank
me
you for having me.
today.
Thank you.
Okay, can you
Yeah.
tell everybody where they can find you on Instagram?
Kene.Izegbu, and I am now the executive chef of WineLair here at the West End.
It won't be your first time on. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much,
Chef.
appreciate it.
Okay, so as I said earlier in the show, I'm very excited to talk to my guest. Emmanuel, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I am very good, and thank you very much for having me as well on the show. I'm really excited
Absolutely.
to
Yeah,
talking to you.
so I'd love to know. I mean, I've read your bio and all that, and I don't want to bore people with me reading something. So I'd love to know a little bit about your background. I know you were born in France and you had a mom who loved food and helped raise your palate, but can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. So born in France, as you just said, several years back, and I grew up in a family that loved food. My mother obviously taught me how to cook. I had an uncle that owned a restaurant and a hotel, a region of France. So I was lucky to. It's going to shock maybe some of the Americans here, but to bartend, even if when I was a kid. But it was France. It was a long time ago, and it was my uncle. So it was a great introduction to the industry, which in fact, of course, I was too young to be really interested in. And after that, I really started to focus on food, but more for my pleasure and cooking at home and traveling around the country. And I went for my job completely different direction. I had a master of organic chemistry and an MBA with a focus on marketing. But I was lucky to combine that scientific and I would say business background with my passion for food because I started working for a company that manufacture flavors for the food and the beverage industry. So I had the chance, still in Europe, to travel all around Western Europe, from like Scandinavian countries to Spain and Italy, through all the rest, and I
Wait,
tasted
can we back?
fantastic
I'm so
food.
sorry, Emmanuel.
No,
Can we back
sure,
up? When you say flavors, what does that
sure.
mean? Explain that.
Yeah, so this is like a space and an industry which is really not really known from people, but it's kind of like behind the scene if you want. But the every time that you buy a product on the shelves or sometime as well from restaurant and food service, the flavor aspect comes from a company that the same company type like I work for. So we are manufacturing flavors. We are extracting natural flavors from vanilla beans, for instance, from citrus, from other sources, and concentrating, them. And the food industry, in that are manufacturing beverages or dairy product or ice cream or sausages or ready meals and so on, buy flavorings from a company like the one I work for.
You know, it seems like you said your science mind fit in with your food passion. I think of like a company like Cuisine Solutions,
Mhm.
the people behind sous vide cooking.
Yes,
That's all technology that again
correct.
is, now showing up in our kitchens,
Yes, absolutely. Yes, definitely. So, to go back to my let's say my background, then I had the chance when I graduated, after I graduated from my MBA, to spend a year in the United States, and I discovered the pace of the business in the United States, and it really fits my my mindset and personality. So I always had back of my mind that I would like to come back. And obviously, I had only a visa for a year. So I started working in Western Europe. And then I had the chance in 2002. The company I work for, in fact, offered me to transfer to the US, and I was supposed to stay only 6 years, and it's been 20. So I really love the business here, and I discovered the whole culinary scene in the US, and I use that passion to start my podcast in 2018 called Flavors Unknown.
But before you started podcasting, you were doing work with star chefs, right?
Yes, correct. So that is, in fact, in the space of like my job, being in charge of marketing for this, flavor company. I always look for interesting partnerships that can bring different added value, to our customers. And the idea of connecting with awarded and acclaimed chefs, pastry chefs, mixologists from around country, in fact, offer a source of inspiration for people working in the food industry. So that's how I developed like the partnership with Star Chefs, and I got in contact with a lot of chefs and pastry chefs and mixologists from around the U.S. And I had the chance to moderate panel discussions during some of the events that we were doing with them, and this is how I started, in fact, my personal podcast after that.
And once you started sort of creating your Rolodex, because now it wasn't just sales, now these are relationships,
Sure. Yeah.
and you did your podcast, what is it about Flavors Unknown? What are you trying to, offer in that podcast?
Yeah. So in those first panel discussion that I had for the flavor company I work for, we were always focusing on the aspect of taste and flavors, and I was always kind of frustrating at the end of those conversations because I wanted to continue the dialogues with those culinary leaders. And with my podcast Flavors Unknown, it was this idea of trying to understand, how their cultural background influence the creative process, and what kind of creative process do they have, what inspire them, how do they create a new dish or create like a new drink, and then is it like an effort that they are doing on their own, or is it a collaboration efforts when they are doing this act of creation. So that's the type of topics that I focus on with other, subject, but that's the main one where I focus my podcast on.
And then when you started doing your book, Conversations Behind the Kitchen Door,
Hmm.
let's talk about, I mean, what was like the mission statement of that book? And then given your vast Rolodex of chefs that you know and have relationships with, how did you winnow it down? Like whose stories were you like, oh, I got to tell this story? How did you figure that out?
Yeah. So the whole story of starting creating the book happened just before the pandemic. So I had probably like a bit more than 3 seasons in the podcast, and for me, it was really this idea that I have access to a great content, very rich content, from the discussion I had with those individuals on the podcast. And I was trying to look at what are like the common threads that I can identify. And what I wanted is, in fact, to bring more people to the podcast because, yes, some people listen to 1, 2, 3 episodes because they knew the guests, or because the guest is from like cities that they live in, and but that's it. So I said there's so much content that could be very useful for other cooks or other chefs, and as well other food enthusiasts, that let's try to put that together in a compelling story, and not only having like the rehashing like the content of the podcast, but adding private conversation that I had with those individuals, and as well my experience, on tasting food around the country, because I do about probably like 60 tasting a year around the country.
So are you a secret judge and you're not telling us? Is that what you're saying?
No, no, not the secret judge. That's a good one, though.
I can't be the first one to say it. Come on.
No, no, not at all. But going back to your question about the mission statement of the book is, I think it starts from the discussion that I have always with my family and friends in France. Um, not too long ago, even I came back after to France, over the summer after 2 years of the break and because of the pandemic. But I still met people in Burgundy. So I was not in Paris, but in Burgundy, people that I haven't met before, some new neighbors of my family. And my sister was explaining to them that I had the podcast and I was reading the book here in the US. And they were kind of like shocked. And they were like, why are you doing this? Because in the US, all they eat is pizza, burgers, and hot dogs. And I'm like,
Come
so
on. Give me a break.
yeah, and
Stop.
we are in 2022. Yeah, absolutely. So I always like the questions about what is like the culture of food in the US. And when I came 20 years ago, I didn't have maybe the content, the culture, the experience how to answer, because every time I was mentioning a restaurant, and my family said, "Oh yeah, but it's Italian background, or oh, it's Chinese background, or it's Japanese background. It's not really American." So now I can tell them that the whole story of the culture, the food in America is definitely linked to the history of immigration. And yes, there's a lot of influences that come from different part of the world and being put together here in the US.
Well,
So
let's talk about immigration and the chef, or immigrants, who make
mhm,
up a uh, large. You're an immigrant yourself. I mean, a large
yeah, yeah,
swath of those in the food industry. Michel Richard, R.I.P., was a great French chef here.
yes,
Jean-Louis Paladin as well. Those two, Roberto Donna is Italian. I mean, there was a
hmm
bunch of them, who were the foundation that DC now stands on top of for the food city that it is today. So is that part of your exploration, sort of the layers that bring the food culture to where it is today?
yeah. In fact, yeah, it started with obviously this influence from the chef culture from France. A lot of the chefs, even here in the US, were in the like thinking about like the 80s, and were trained by French chefs. So there was all this influence, but nowadays, in fact, you see influences coming from Philippines, coming from Mexico, coming from Peru, coming from other part of the world, and you have fantastic chefs that have been acclaimed by either James Beard or by star chefs that are either first generation
I
or
was
second
thinking
generation.
Michelin, just so you know.
I'm sorry.
When I called you out as a judge, I wasn't thinking James Beard. I was thinking Michelin. But
Ah,
because if you're
but
traveling like that, like that's a
yeah,
great.
exactly. Maybe I should call them after our
I think you
discussion.
should. I think you should. I have their number. I can get you in touch.
Okay.
Uh, but
Yeah.
so I agree with you. I mean, listen, I grew up outside New York City.
hmm
I was fortunate that I got to travel a lot when I was young, and
Yeah.
hopefully still do. But to me, New York City was this mecca of cuisine and offerings. You could go into New York City in the 80s and the 90s and really eat any cuisine from any culture from around the world. And
hmm
even DC, while DC didn't have the breadth and depth of restaurants that it has today, because of the diplomats here, because of the embassies here,
Correct.
you could find cuisine from, anywhere from Afghanistan I mean, there's so many Ethiopian restaurants here. I mean, back in the 80s, that was like, ooh, exotic. And
Sure.
now it's, you want Ethiopian tonight? Like, what do you feel like having tonight? Do you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
really different. Um,
Absolutely. And I think it was important, for me, and that's why I have like the whole chapter in the book that I've called the mosaic of culture, which is really based on uh, a conversation that I had with at least 15 or 20 chef from that are either first or second generation, American. So I think there's, when people are going to read this chapter, they are going to probably discover some interesting stuff.
Well, I love, to me, what I love when I talk about the hospitality industry is the history and how it keeps building.
Hmm.
You know, how what happened 30 years ago still has a thread and is reflective today. And I love following that kind of thread to see how it evolves and
Hmm.
changes.
Hmm.
When you were deciding again about whether it was for that chapter or some of your other chapters, who are some of the stories that you really wanted to tell?
Um, so, in fact, it was really based on first of the structure of the book, and then I had so different chapter focusing on different major topic. And so the first one is about how to become a successful chef. The second one is about how to have access to quality ingredients, and so on and so forth. So when I decided those topic, then I went into, okay, which story do I want to tell? Which chef that I talk to that resonate the most with, a certain aspect of of the book. But when it comes to there's a lot of story. It's very difficult for me to pick, but because I have 50 plus chefs, feature in the book. But there's some interesting things. So one come to mind, at the moment is when we talk about the sources of inspiration, is the conversation that I have with, of course, blank now, with Fiore Tedesco from Austin, so from his restaurant Locadoro. And he's talking about, something really different from the inspiration from other chefs. He's talking about him taking a shower and then suddenly having in his mind, he's singing like the song from Neil Young, like on the beach. And then at that time some image come in his brain of like a beach that he went to when he was a kid, and he see like the cliffs and he see like the sands and the waves and and so on, and then suddenly he working with associations with scallops and seaweeds and different, and then in his mind he's building this dish. And after being done with his shower, he started like writing like the recipe, and he thought that it was so interesting that that night he wrote the whole series of recipe based on an entire album from Neil Young. And that was like his first dinner connected to like a music piece. And in fact he started to create additional tasting menus with other artists that he was in love with. So that's for me like a story that I wanted to to write in the book when it comes to sources of inspiration.
Well, that is, it's so unique. It's a unique story. I don't think you hear that.
No, exactly. I mean,
You
you hear
know,
a lot of like people inspired by painting, by colors, looking through cookbooks, walking in nature. Yes, we have a lot of those stories, but that one was really unique.
that is really unique. Well, so you talk about, like, the book is really for people who love the industry, obviously, but foodies, culinary students, cooks, and chefs. You sort of like divvy us all. So how do you, like, what is it in there for like the diehards? Like I always talk about the foodies because I used to be one, right? Like before I was in the industry, I loved this industry and I would dine out and I would cook at home and do all these things, but I didn't have my feet in the industry. But I was a lover of it. But I think I do say this a lot. I think there is a misconception in the hospitality industry that foodies understand the business of the hospitality industry. They don't. They don't understand it, and they don't have to. They're not in it. So they don't have to. But I do feel like it's a big problem. So, what are some of the things that are in the book that you think for the diehards that they'll really enjoy, other than like the great story about how that menu was put together?
Yeah, I think that's for everyone who is passionate about food, like you are and myself as well, is we always emotionally connected with like a menu that you read, like or food, like a dish or like a drink that we like. And I think that the people are going to enjoy learning about like the journey of and the story of the chef that prepared those products. Another aspect as well is about looking at connecting the quality of the ingredients that you are um, sourcing to the quality and the experience of the dish of the drink that you are going to prepare, those chefs are preparing. So in the book is one of the chapter I talk about what I learned from the chef on how to access quality ingredients, building relationship with your farmers at the farmers market, finding inspiration when you are traveling. I have like one of the chapter kind of a 20 points on organizing your own tasting tour when you are traveling and bringing ingredients and product back for your own benefits
I
and
know, but you know
experience.
that's not always easy to do. They'll stop you sometimes with product. I mean, I have like
Yeah,
I have like mustard that they would not let me bring in. So.
I know very well. I know very well. I don't want to say anything because I don't know who is going to listen to your podcast. But there's I in fact I've been lucky so far is to and has always been very honest to declare when they ask me when I travel back, do you have anything? I said, yeah, you know what? I come back from France, so I have chocolate, I have wine, I have this, I have that, and it was like okay,
Okay,
enjoy. So
well, that's good.
so
Well,
I was lucky.
could we talk about your 20 points a bit? Because I do think for a lot of people when they travel, um, defining their travel itinerary that incorporates not just good eating, but getting a better understanding of the cuisine culture there is important for a lot of people. So while it's great to go to a big name restaurant or maybe go eat in a Nona's around the corner, um, how do you recommend people sort of do their homework without being overwhelmed? Because as you know, there's so much content out there and everybody's telling you, no, you got to eat here. Oh, you got to go meet this person or you got to go do that. What's your recommendation on that?
Um, I have to say that yes, it takes a little bit of time. I mean, if you are passionate, about the topic, you will take the time. I know I always annoyed my kids, when we go on a trip because I spend probably more time searching, for information because I'm kind of I don't the fear of missing out, even if I'm not a millennial or a Gen Z, I have
You
that
have
thing.
FOMO. I
This
understand. I get it.
exactly. So the idea is that I really spend the time to search like different sites and I am organizing things on my phone and I have list of the restaurant that I want to go to. I have the list of like the coffee roasters that I'm going to go to in the morning. I have the list of the special bakery. All of this is prepared before I go there. I have as well reached out maybe to chef that I know in the network that I've been to those places and they are going to give me some tips on where to focus on. So I know the people I have like a whole methods that I detail on my book and the people can really look at it. Obviously yes, there's some work to be done in order to prepare that. But I really want to do this if I go somewhere because I don't want to go back and someone would tell me, "Hey, have you tried this?" And I'm like, "Damn, no!" And now I missed the opportunity. So
Right. Now
so
you got
that's
to go
why
back.
I'm putting the effort first. So yes, a little bit of efforts, or otherwise, if they want the easy way, they can contact me or they can contact you. I'm sure that you know a lot of places that I do and I will be happy to to give them some recommendations. In fact, I think there's not a day that goes by without me sending a recommendation to someone contacting me to say, hey, I'm going to New Orleans in 2 weekends. Do you have any recommendation? Oh, I'm going to Portland. in Oregon. So do you know any place, anywhere to go?
Well, I was going to follow that up with I do believe that asking those in the know. I mean, I love when people ask me my opinion. So I'm happy to share it. And, if I'm traveling, I always ask, I think if I'm going to Italy and if I'm going to a specific region or I'm going to France or I'm going to wherever, I talk to the people from that area, and I say, what do you know? I mean, most people are delighted to share, their heritage and their country and their passions. So I think that's very good. So I wanted to go back to the book a little bit. You talk about identifying 7 common paths when it comes to creative process for chefs. How did you identify them and work through them? And can you talk me through it a little bit?
Sure. So that was kind of a haha moment for me because, as I mentioned to you, in all of those podcasts, I talked to the chef, about their creative process. And very often they tell me that they don't really have one, that, they start with the produce. And then after that, the inspiration comes, and then the techniques, are going to apply to, the product. So it's really like the idea. I think the best summary in terms of the process has been given to me by Chef Sean Brock. And it talks about the pie theory, which is product, idea, and execution. So the product is produced first, then the inspiration, then the techniques. But it was interesting when I was going through my notes and the recording, is suddenly I could see, some commonalities in terms of the process. And yes, as I summarize it into like, 7. Um, and they are, in the book. So I don't know if you are editing, but if you are not, you have to, people, because I don't remember not by heart.
Well, that's okay.
Um,
But how about if you pick out 1 or 2?
yeah. So they are, there's like, one is about like, elevate. That's one of the process. So the element is, if they have like a recipe, for instance, they are going to, look at for an ingredients that is maybe a little bit more noble, or they are going to search for something that is really unique, and they are going to elevate the recipe by focusing on the specific ingredients. That, it could be like a different variety, or it could be, suddenly they are going to use caviar, for instance, in that recipe. So that's what's elements, which is one aspect, which is elevate. Another one, which is very common for chefs, that one they always talk about it, even if they don't use the word. But this is in fact the, when they substitute, because it's really connected to the seasonality, aspect of the industry. And chef will have like a recipe structure, and then they are going from one season to another. They are going to substitute one specific ingredient. So maybe it's a pork, chop with, I want to say peach, in the summer, and then suddenly maybe it's going to come like squash, and then maybe it's going to
Apple.
become like apple, and so on. So it's exercise of like substitution, So it's like two example of, how chefs are, looking at the creative process.
Right. Well, so we're going to have to wrap up in a couple seconds, but I'm sort of curious, what would you say about the book? Like, what's most helpful for like both the amateur and the chef? Like, it's so chock full of information, and you interview so many people, and you sort of take stories that really, I mean, it's amazing. But what would you say, like, for the amateur and for the chef, that they could both walk away with?
Yeah, I mean, for the amateur, as I mentioned before, I mean, it's really about like the story. If you are passionate about that food, and if you like the space of chefs, then you are going to know more about like the journey they are taking to create, a dish or drinks, and the story behind, those things. So that's for me the, like really, and the idea as well that, you don't have to follow a recipe, and that you can be free, in the kitchen to
Well,
experiment.
that is kind of where I wanted to go because I think the amateur, even they don't trust themselves all the time when they're in the kitchen, right? If they haven't had
Correct.
training, I have friends who are they're nervous cookers. They're in the kitchen, they love it, but they're nervous, and I'm always like, if it doesn't come out good, you throw it away. Like,
Exactly. That's not a big deal,
so
It's not a big deal, but I think like in the book, they are going to understand that what the chef wants to achieve is the same thing that you want to achieve, in the kitchen. It's the balance of flavors. And the balance of flavors, you're going to have it by playing by with using different elements that are, or the flavors that are in fact the basic taste that are, like the acidity, the sweetness, the saltiness, and so on, bitterness, and blah blah blah, and umami. So then, you are going to learn that there's different way to bring acidity. It could be, through citrus, but it could be as well through vinegars, or it could be through, other ingredients. And you can be free in the kitchen to experiment, and you can switch those things, you can replace it. That I think this is like the main learning is like, don't, be shy, and don't fear, that you have to to follow a recipe to the T. Is in fact, you can, anyhow, the recipe have been given as a guideline, especially for the home cooks, because depending on where you live, you are going to have access to different, varieties, or like the maturity of the fruits or the veggies, are going to be different. So you have to adapt, in fact, those recipes. So that's what the amateur is going to, to learn reading the book. I would say for the people that are more professional. So if you are like a young cook, I think there's some interesting learnings that could be applied as well for any type of industry. But the idea is that, for me, it was interesting to learn from those culinary leaders that, they are really advising from those young people to define short and long term goals very early on, and follow those goals, and find, people within the industry to become their mentor. That is like key in order for someone who is young that wants to, find a place, in this industry. And then for the people that are already a little bit more established, I think that the book is going to be interesting because they are going to learn what the others, are doing. So people
well,
that,
I think for the more
that
established chef, what's important, and you probably know this better than anybody, for the established chef is staying there, staying relevant. Talk about elevating, like you, the young ones they're nipping at your heels. So, you want to be a part of it, which means you have to evolve in order to keep your offerings fresh. I mean, obviously there are things that need to stay on the menu because nobody's going to let it go or whatever, but the rest of it has to engage and has to stay fresh
sure,
always, or else,
absolutely.
you know,
and
that's
and 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 some people that are taking over, some established restaurants where there is already a clientele. And there's a story in the book from one of the chefs, from Asheville, talking about, that challenge, and the fact that he wanted to redynamize and modernize the menu, and he had to backtrack because, some of the locals, were used to certain dishes. And yes, he spent the time to elevate them and change them, but still to keep them, in the menu, because that was something very important in order to make sure that the locals, will come back, because they are the one that pay the bill at the end of the day.
right, exactly. Well, it's called tushies and seats, right? You have to
Uh-huh.
keep people there. I mean, well, your book, Conversations Behind the Kitchen Door, is for such a broad audience because it is for the food lover, but also for those who are actually work in the industry. So I love it, and I really appreciate you taking the time with me today to talk about it and your podcast, Flavors Unknown. Emmanuel, can you tell everybody where they can find you either online or on Instagram?
Sure. So, I mean, so they can via email, they can connect me with at contact@flavorsunknown.com, and on Instagram or Facebook, it's at Flavors Unknown. So that's very easy.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I
Thank
greatly
you
appreciate
very
it.
much for having me as well. I really appreciate it.
Well, that was a terrific show, and I want to thank all of you for joining me today. I am in the beautiful WineLair. It is a private wine club, but they do events and tastings. So you do want to check out the listeryouwantit.com because I do list all of it there. Of course, you want to follow me at NYCCINELLIS on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for now. You want to tune in every Sunday to 1500 to hear me and David on Foodie and the Beast, the DC area's only food, wine, and hospitality radio. And I want to thank you all for joining me today. You need to check out Emmanuel's book, of course. And I want to remind you that when you dine out, and there's so much delicious dining to do, to please remember to take your kindness pills. There are staffing shortages. It is real. There is supply issues, also real. No restaurant wants you to have a bad time. They want you to come in and they want you to come back. So just deep breath out there. Everybody take a deep breath. Again, thanks for joining me, Nycci Nellis, on Industry Night. Have a delicious week.
Produced by Heartcast Media.